The invitation Maya Chen's hands trembled as she held the cream-colored envelope. Its weight far heavier than paper should be. The elegant script across the front read Dr. Maya Chen, in flowing letters that seemed to mock her small apartment in the fishing village of Palawan. Through her window, she could hear her father mending nets on the beach, same rhythmic sound that had accompanied her childhood dreams of saving the ocean. The Monaco Environmental Summit cordially invites you to present your research on coral restoration techniques, she read aloud, her voice carrying the musical lilt of Tagalog that had shaped her English. The invitation felt surreal in her calloused hands, still stained with salt water from yesterday's dive. Her grandmother, Lola Rosa, shuffled into the room carrying 2 cups of coffee. At 83, she moved slowly, but her eyes remained sharp. As obsidian, you're holding that paper like it might bite you, Apo, she said. Using the Tagalog word for a grandchild, Maya looked up, her dark eyes wide with disbelief. Lola, they want me to speak in Monaco, in front of millionaires and famous scientists. Me, from our little village. Lola Rosa settled beside her granddaughter, her weathered hands gentle as she took the invitation. She couldn't read English, but she understood the weight of the moment. Tell me about this place, Monaco. It's where the richest people in the world go, Maya explained, her accent thick with emotion. They have casinos and yachts bigger than our entire barangay. And I'm supposed to stand in front of them and talk about coral? She laughed nervously, the sound catching in her throat. Her grandmother was quiet for a long moment, studying Maya's face. Finally, she spoke. When you were 7, you cried because the corals near our reef were turning white. You said you would fix them someday. Did you fix them? Maya nodded, thinking of the vibrant coral gardens she'd successfully restored using her innovative grafting technique. 3 years of painstaking work, diving daily in waters most researchers only visited in submarines. Yes, Lola, the reef is healthy again. Then why does it matter where you tell people about it? Whether they have yachts or bancas, they still need healthy oceans? But Maya's fears ran deeper than stage fright. She'd seen the videos of international conferences, watched brilliant minds present their work in perfect, unaccented English. Her own voice carried the music of her homeland in every syllable. She'd witnessed how some people dismissed accented speakers as less intelligent, less credible. What if they don't understand me? What if they think I don't belong there, Lola? Rosa stood slowly, walking to the shelf where Maya's university diplomas hung beside faded photographs of 4 generations of fishermen. She touched the frame holding Maya's PhD certificate from the University of the Philippines. Apo, your voice carries the wisdom of our ancestors who lived with the sea for thousands of years. Those rich people in Monaco, they may have money, but do they have this? She gestured toward the ocean visible through their window, where Maya had learned to read the moods of the water before she could read books. That evening, Maya walked along the beach where she'd first fallen in love with marine biology. The coral restoration site glowed softly in the moonlight, healthy polyps she'd nurtured back to life swaying in the gentle current. Fish darted between the formations in silver flashes, proof that her work had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. She pulled out her phone and began typing her response to the Monaco Environmental Summit. Her finger hovered over the send button for a moment before her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. With a deep breath that tasted of salt and possibility, she pressed send. The ocean whispered its approval against the shore. The presentation, the Hermitage Hotel in Monaco, gleamed like a jewel against the Mediterranean coast, its marble floors reflecting the designer gowns and tailored suits of the world's environmental elite. Maya stood in the grand ballroom clutching her presentation materials, feeling like a small fish that had accidentally swum into a shark tank around her. Conversations flowed in multiple languages, but all with the same polished accent of international privilege. She recognized several faces from environmental magazines, Dr. Victoria Sterling from Cambridge, whose climate research graced the covers of Nature, Professor Hans Müller from ETH Zurich, whose carbon capture technology had made him a household name among the scientifically literate. Excuse me? A woman in a champagne-colored dress approached Maya, her smile sharp as crystal. I'm Isabella Fontaine from the European Climate Foundation. You must be Dr. Chen from the Philippines? The way she pronounced Philippines made it sound exotic and quaint. like a vacation destination rather than a place where serious science happened. "Yes, hello," Maya replied, her accent immediately marking her as different in the sea of cosmopolitan voices. "I'm presenting on coral restoration techniques." Isabella's eyebrows lifted slightly. "How fascinating. Coral gardening, right? Such important local work." The word local carried a subtle dismissal, as if Maya's research was charming but irrelevant. Two global concerns. Before Maya could respond, the moderator called for attention. She made her way to the side stage, her heart hammering against her ribs. The ballroom held 300 of the most influential environmental funders and researchers. In the world, people who could make or break careers with a single conversation. "Our next presenter is Dr. Maya Chen from the University of the Philippines," the moderator announced. "She'll be discussing coral restoration in Southeast Asian waters." Guess. As Maya walked to the podium, she caught fragments of whispered conversations. "Never heard of her? Probably some feel-good local project? Why are we giving presentation time to regional research?" The microphone felt cold against her palm as she adjusted it, the spotlight suddenly blazing hot on her face. She looked out at the audience and saw a sea of expectant faces. Some politely attentive, others already checking their phones. "Good evening," she began, her accent immediately apparent in those two words. A few audience members exchanged glances. "My name is Maya Chen, and I want to tell you about dying coral reefs and how we can bring them back to life." She clicked to her first slide, a photograph of bleached coral, white as bones against the dark water. The image had been taken at her home reef 3 years ago, but it could have been anywhere in the warming oceans. "This is what coral death looks like," she continued, her voice growing stronger despite the challenging pronunciation of certain words. "But this is what hope looks like." The next slide showed the same reef location, now vibrant with color and teeming with fish. A few audience members leaned forward. Their interest genuinely piqued. Maya began explaining her grafting technique, how she developed a method to transplant healthy coral fragments onto damaged reef structures, creating anchor points for natural recovery. Her English became more confident as she delved into the science, though her accent remained pronounced. "The success rate is 93%, she said, showing graphs of coral coverage over time. "And the biodiversity recovery rate is even higher." But she could feel the subtle condescension in the room. When she pronounced technique with a soft T, or rolled her RS in coral, she noticed smirks and sideways glances. During the question period, Dr. Sterling asked about scalability concerns for such artisanal methods, emphasizing artisanal in a way that made Akana's painstaking work sound quaint rather than revolutionary. Professor Mueller questioned her data collection methods with barely concealed skepticism. "In our European research, we find that local observations often lack the rigor of standardized protocols." Maya answered each question professionally, but she could feel herself shrinking. Under their subtle dismissal, her accent, her origin, even her success, seemed to mark her as an outsider playing in a game where she didn't belong. As she concluded her presentation, the applause was polite, but brief. She gathered her materials with burning cheeks, overhearing Isabella Fontaine whisper to her companion, "Charming, but hardly groundbreaking. These developing world projects are so limited in scope." Maya walked off the stage feeling smaller than when she'd arrived, her grandmother's words about carrying ancestral wisdom seeming naive in this glittering room where accent determined credibility and origin shaped opportunity. The silence. Maya stood at the side of the stage, her presentation materials clutched against her chest like armor that had failed to protect her. The polite applause had already faded, replaced by the gentle clink of champagne glasses and the resumed murmur of networking conversations. She felt invisible again, just another face in the crowd of brilliant minds, who belonged here in ways she clearly did. Dr. Sterling was already commanding attention near the refreshment table, regaling a circle of admirers with stories from her latest Arctic expedition. Professor Mueller held court by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Monaco harbor, where million-dollar yachts bobbed like toys in the evening light. Maya had been dismissed, filed away as an interesting but ultimately irrelevant footnote to the evening's more serious presentations. She was gathering the courage to slip out quietly when something shifted in the room's atmosphere. Conversations began to fade, starting from the back of the ballroom and rippling forward like a wave approaching shore. Heads turned, and Maya followed their gaze to see what had captured the attention of 300 of the world's most important environmental leaders. A man was rising from a seat in the back corner, where he'd been sitting so quietly that most attendees hadn't even noticed him. He was younger than Maya had expected, perhaps, in his early 30s, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it, and clothes that, while expensive, seemed chosen for comfort rather than display. Unlike the peacocking academics and foundation heads who dominated the room, he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. Alexander Reeves. Even Maya, from her small village in Palawan, knew that name. The enigmatic founder of Meridian Energy had built a renewable empire before his 28th birthday. But he rarely appeared at conferences, never gave interviews, and seemed to prefer working behind the scenes. His presence here was as unexpected as finding a pearl in an oyster shell. The silence in the room was so complete that Maya could hear her own heartbeat. Alexander walked slowly down the center aisle, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. He wasn't looking at the crowd of luminaries who had suddenly forgotten their conversations to stare at him. His eyes were fixed steadily ahead. On the stage where Maya still stood, Isabella Fontaine's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. Dr. Sterling actually stopped mid-sentence, her mouth slightly open. Professor Mueller stepped forward as if to intercept Alexander's path, but something in the younger man's expression made him think better of it. Maya felt her breath catch as she realized Alexander was walking directly toward her. The most powerful person in the room, perhaps in the entire environmental movement, was approaching the stage where she stood, holding her dismissed. Research like wilted flowers. He didn't speak as he climbed the 3 steps to the platform. He didn't smile or offer his hand or make any of the performative gestures that characterized most interactions in this rarefied world. He simply walked to where Maya stood and positioned himself beside her, facing the now completely silent audience. The silence stretched like a held breath. Maya could feel the warmth radiating from Alexander's presence beside her, could sense the subtle shift in the room's energy as 300 brilliant minds suddenly had to recalibrate. Everything they thought they understood about the evening's hierarchy. Still, Alexander said nothing. He stood with his hands clasped loosely behind his back, his expression calm but somehow electric with contained intensity. His silence was more powerful than any speech, more commanding than any introduction. It was the silence of someone who knew that his mere presence could change the trajectory of careers, the funding of projects, the direction of entire movements. Maya felt something stirring in her chest. Not just confusion or gratitude, but a strange sense of recognition. She didn't know why Alexander Reeves had chosen to stand beside her, but in this moment of perfect quiet, she understood that something fundamental was shifting. The room's attention had been transformed from polite dismissal to rapt focus, and she was no longer invisible. The silence continued, heavy with possibility and unspoken meaning. In that crystalline moment, Maya realized that sometimes the most powerful statements were made without words at all. Alexander's presence beside her spoke volumes about value and worth, about who deserved to be heard and who had the right to determine importance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, Alexander turned slightly toward Maya. He didn't speak to the crowd yet, but offered her the smallest of nods, a gesture of acknowledgement, of respect, of solidarity, that somehow meant more than all the polite applause in the world. The recognition Alexander finally turned to face the audience, his gaze sweeping slowly across the sea of faces that stared back at him with rapt attention. When he spoke, his voice carried easily through the ballroom without amplification, clear and measured, but with an undercurrent of something that made everyone lean forward. "I've been sitting in the back of this room for 3 hours," he began, his words cutting through the silence like a blade through silk. "I've heard presentations about carbon markets, about policy frameworks, about technological solutions that will require billions in funding and decades to implement." Eyes found Isabella Fontaine in the crowd, then Dr. Sterling, then Professor Mueller. Each gaze lingered just long enough to make its point. But in the last 20 minutes, I heard something different. I heard about a woman who looked at a dying reef in her backyard and decided to bring it back to life with her own hands. Who dove every day for 3 years, piece by piece, fragment by fragment, until she achieved a 93% success rate that most of our billion-dollar research facilities would envy. Maya felt her cheeks burning, but this time not with shame. Alexander's voice carried no trace of condescension, no hint that her work was merely charming or local. Dr. Chen Alexander continued, turning to face her directly. Developed this technique with a budget that probably wouldn't cover the catering for most conferences like this one. She did it while her research was dismissed as artisanal by institutions that have never successfully restored a single square meter of reef. The pointed look he gave Professor Mueller made the German scientist shift uncomfortably. Maya noticed several audience members glancing between Alexander and the academics who had questioned her methodology just minutes before. I want to tell you something about this work that maybe you missed while you were discussing scalability and standardized protocols, Alexander said, his voice gaining intensity. 3 years ago, I sent a team of marine biologists to assess reef restoration projects across Southeast Asia. They were looking for techniques we could fund and scale globally. He paused, letting that information settle over the room like settling dust. Tone's site in Palawan had the highest success rate they'd ever documented. Higher than projects in Australia, higher than initiatives in the Caribbean, higher than anything we'd seen from institutions with $100 million budgets. My team recommended immediate investment and collaboration. Maya's eyes widened. She had no idea Alexander's company had even known about her work, let alone evaluated it. But when we reached out to international academic networks for collaboration, we were told her work was interesting, but limited in scope. It was locally adapted, and therefore not suitable for global application. That language barriers might complicate meaningful partnership. The silence in the room had taken on a different quality, now uncomfortable, charged with the recognition of uncomfortable truths. Alexander's voice softened slightly, but carried even more power. I built my first company in a shipping container, behind a gas station in rural Montana. Had no trust fund, no Ivy League connections, no accent that opened doors. I was told my ideas were too ambitious, too unconventional, too removed from established thinking to succeed. He looked directly at Maya again. But I never had to overcome what Dr. Chen has overcome. Never had my credibility questioned because of how I pronounced certain words. I never had my groundbreaking research dismissed as charming because of where I was born. The pointed emphasis on charming made Isabella Fontaine's face flush crimson. Several other audience members had the grace to look ashamed. The environmental crisis doesn't care about your accent, Alexander continued, his voice building to its crescendo. Rising sea levels don't respect university rankings. Dying coral reefs don't check your passport before deciding whether your solution is worth implementing. He stepped closer to Maya, his presence somehow making her feel both smaller and larger at the same time. Dr. Chen, I've been looking for someone like you for 3 years, someone who sees problems and solves them, instead of forming committees to study them. Someone who gets results instead of writing grant applications. Someone who understands that the ocean doesn't speak English. French or German, it speaks in the language of life and death, and you happen to be fluent. The room was so quiet that Maya could hear the Mediterranean waves against the harbor. Wall outside? If you're open to it, Alexander said, his voice returning to conversational volume, but somehow carrying even more weight. I'd like to personally fund the global expansion of your coral restoration program. Full budget, complete autonomy, international team support. And I'd very much like to take you to dinner tonight to discuss how we can change the world together. The same audience that had dismissed her 20 minutes ago was now staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to envy to newfound respect. But Alexander's eyes held something different, genuine admiration, intellectual curiosity, and what looked like the beginning of a partnership that could reshape everything she'd thought possible. The beginning 6 months later, Maya stood on the deck of the research vessel Coral Symphony. watching her team of marine biologists from 12 different countries prepare for their morning dive. The ship floated above the Ningaloo Reef off the coast of Australia, where her restoration technique was being implemented on a scale she'd never imagined possible. The grafting success rate here is holding at 91%. Called out Dr. James Morrison, Scottish marine biologist who'd left his position at Edinburgh University to join Maya's project. That's consistent with our results in the Maldives. And the Caribbean sites? Maya smiled, adjusting the communication headset that kept her connected to dive teams. Working simultaneously at restoration sites across 3 oceans, her accent still colored every word she spoke. But now it was simply part of who she was, no longer a barrier to overcome, but a reminder of the village wisdom that had started everything. Her satellite phone buzzed with a message from Alexander, who was currently in renewable energy meetings in Singapore. "How's the reef looking today? Can't wait to see the progress reports tonight." Their relationship had evolved naturally over the months, built on shared video calls discussing coral polyp behavior and late night conversations about the intersection of environmental science and social justice. What had begun as professional collaboration had deepened into something neither of them had expected, a partnership that transcended the boundaries between work and life, between vision and reality. Maya, her field coordinator, Dr. Priya Sharma, approached with a tablet, showing the latest data. The biodiversity indices from all sites are exceeding projections. We're not just restoring coral, we're actually improving on the original ecosystem complexity. The transformation hadn't just been in the coral reefs. Maya's work had attracted international attention, but more importantly, it had inspired a new generation of marine biologists from underrepresented communities. The Meridian Foundation had established scholarship programs specifically for researchers from coastal developing nations, recognizing that those who lived closest to threatened ecosystems often understood them best. Dr. Chen, her communications officer, called out, "You have a video call from the Philippines team. They want to show you something exciting." Maya connected to see Dr. Rosa Santos, her former student who now led the Palawan expansion project, beaming from the familiar waters of Maya's childhood reef. "Maya, you have to see this," Rosa said, her own accented English carrying the same musical quality that had once made Maya self-conscious. "The coral gardens you started 3 years ago, they're spawning." The screen filled with an underwater galaxy of tiny coral larvae, millions of potential new reefs drifting on the current like stars seeking new homes. Maya felt tears prick her eyes, remembering her grandmother's words about voices carrying ancestral wisdom. That evening, as the choral symphony anchored in calm waters, Maya video called Alexander from her cabin. He appeared on screen in his Singapore hotel room, his hair tousled from what had clearly been a long day of meetings, but his eyes lighting up when he saw her. "Tell me everything," he said, settling back in his chair with the relaxed attention she'd come to cherish. "How are our reefs doing today?" As Maya shared the day's discoveries, the spawning event in Palawan, the successful grafting in Australia, the biodiversity explosion in the Maldives, she watched Alexander's face reflect her own excitement. He asked detailed questions about polyp attachment rates and symbiotic algae populations with the same intensity. He brought to renewable energy infrastructure and carbon capture technology. "You know what's remarkable?" Alexander said when she finished her report. 6 months ago, you were worried that your accent would make people think less of your science. Now you're leading international teams and your work is being replicated on 6 continents. Maya smiled, thinking of the young marine biologists from fishing villages and coastal communities, who now felt empowered to pursue their own research because they'd seen someone like them succeed on the global stage. "I think," she said softly, "my grandmother was right about voices carrying wisdom. But I never imagined how far that voice could travel, or how many other voices it would inspire," Alexander added. The scholarship applications we're receiving, Maya, they're incredible. Kids from coastal communities all over the world who want to study marine biology because they saw what you accomplished. Through the cabin window, Maya could see the ocean stretching endlessly under the star-filled sky. Tomorrow she would dive again, placing coral fragments with the same careful hands that had once seemed too small to change anything significant. But now she understood that the most powerful transformations often began with a single voice brave, enough to speak, an accent that carried the wisdom of generations, and the recognition that brilliance existed in every corner of the world. It just needed someone willing to listen. In Singapore, Alexander was already planning their next project, his mind spinning with possibilities for scaling Maya's techniques. 2 threatened reefs across the Pacific. But tonight, he was simply grateful for the moment in Monaco when he'd chosen to stand beside someone whose courage had changed not just coral reefs, but his understanding of what it meant to truly see and value the brilliant minds that conventional wisdom too often overlooked.